This station's 72, broadcasting live, or as alive as we can be these days. I'm Alex Gray, still here, still breathing, still talking to whoever's out there, if there's anyone left. I know it's hard to keep track of time now. The days are all blending together into one long nightmare. I think it's day 3, but I could be wrong. Who knows what's real anymore? One thing's for sure. It's not like the world used to be. The world I knew, where things made sense. That world is gone. In its place, we have something far worse. It's the unknown. And in the face of that, it's hard to hold on to hope. But I'm still here, holding on. And if you're still listening, then maybe you're holding on too. I won't lie. There's been a heaviness in my chest these past few hours. It's not just the weight of this broadcast or the world situation. It's the isolation. I feel it every minute. The knowledge that we're all alone now, each of us fighting our own battle, unsure if anyone will ever hear us. There's a strange kind of madness in that. But if you're listening to this, if you've somehow tuned in, then we're still connected. We're still fighting. And for that reason, I'll keep talking. Keep broadcasting. So to whoever you are, wherever you are, if there's a you left, this broadcast is for you. Hang in there. We're in this together. I've got updates, reports, and some new survivor stories to share. But first, let me take a moment and recap where we've been. Where we've come from in just 3 days. Yesterday was tough. I won't sugarcoat it. We talked about the collapse of New York City, the once bustling streets, now nothing more than a graveyard. The alien attack that started with a few isolated incidents has grown into something much, much worse. I've been hearing reports of massive UFOs flying over the city, larger than anything we've seen before, just hovering in place like a dark omen. The attack on the city has escalated into a full-scale invasion. The strange creatures we've been calling aliens have multiplied, and they're no longer attacking randomly. They've organized, adapted, and they're planning. They're not just attacking civilians now. They're targeting strategic locations, military bases, government installations. It's almost like they're working with purpose. And then there's California, the state that was once the crown jewel of the United States, now a battlefield. The government tried to make some moves. The military's been deployed. Martial law was declared in most cities, and curfews were set up to try to keep the public from descending into total chaos. But it's not working. Some of the military checkpoints have been overrun by desperate civilians. The roads are a mess. The infrastructure is crumbling, and even the army is no match for what's happening. The infection, the violence, the sheer unpredictability of these events, they're too much. It's all too much. And as the infection spreads, more survivors are reaching out to share their stories. We heard from Emily and Diego yesterday. They were fighting their way through the chaos in California, trying to make it to safety. I don't know if they made it. They weren't able to give me a concrete location, and with the way things are moving, I wouldn't be surprised if they've been swallowed up by the madness. Then there was Paul. He sent me a message after we went off air. He and his group had fortified a warehouse in the city, thinking they could ride this out. But now their supplies are running low. There's no escape route, and the infected are closing in. He said the barricades were holding, but he's not sure for how long. Every hour feels like a lifetime. It's hard, you know? It's hard to give you these updates. It's hard to not feel like I'm just another voice in the void. But there's a part of me that believes in these survivors, that believes in you, if you're still out there. Maybe the world is falling apart, but if we don't keep going, if we don't keep fighting, what's left? So, here we are, another day, another night, and it feels like we're just one step away from everything slipping through our fingers. I've been thinking about this, about what it means to keep going. I know I'm not alone in feeling like this. We've all had to come to terms with what's happening. We've had to accept that the world we knew is gone. The government has failed us. The military is doing what they can, but it's not enough. No one has answers. No one knows how to fix this. And every day I wake up, open my eyes, and wonder if this will be the day that the signal finally goes dead. The day I stop hearing from the people who need me. But I can't let myself think like that. I can't let myself spiral. I can't afford to, because someone has to be here. Someone has to keep going. So, here I am. And as long as I've got breath, as long as I've got this transmission, I'm going to keep speaking the truth, even when it's hard. Even when it feels like it doesn't matter. I keep hearing about people who are out there trying to survive, just like me. But the difference is they don't have anyone else. They don't have a voice. And that's why I'm still here telling you what's going on. I can't stop now. Not when I know people are depending on this. And for those of you who've sent in messages or tried to reach out, I see you. You're not forgotten. The world outside is terrifying. But the fact that you're still fighting, well, that means something. I can't say it's easy. In fact, it's harder than anything I've ever done. But we've all got a choice, don't we? We can either let the darkness swallow us, or we can keep fighting. One day at a time. Okay, enough about me. Let's get into the updates. We've got a lot to cover today. If you're still with me, still listening, then I promise to keep you informed. I'll share what's happening out there, what the world is trying to do to contain this disaster. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find something to hold on to, because, damn it, we have to. It's day 3, and the infection has spread farther than we ever thought possible. From the East Coast to the West, from the southern borders to the northern reaches, nothing is safe. The reports I'm getting are more disturbing by the hour. The infected zones are no longer just chaotic clusters of mindless walkers. They've changed, they've adapted, and we've got a bigger problem on our hands. Take New York City. Yesterday I told you about the alien attack that ravaged the city, but I left out something crucial. Those infected zones within the city, the ones that were already under quarantine, they've become something else. The usual infected, those that just wander aimlessly, are now working together. And I'm not talking about the type of coordination you see in a horde. No, this is more like an intelligence we haven't seen before. People who are still out there are reporting that the infected are no longer just hunting for food. They're setting up, well, I'm not sure what to call it, but it seems like they're preparing for something. A strategy. I've heard whispers of them digging into the ground, like they're tunneling or trying to set up a trap of some kind. This isn't just an infection anymore. This is something that's evolving. And fast. Reports from other cities paint a similar picture. In Boston, just north of New York, survivors are reporting strange behavior from the infected. The zombies, if you can even call them that now, are organizing around specific points of interest, military bases, hospitals, and government buildings. It's as if they're trying to prevent us from regaining control. There's no telling if these infected are becoming more intelligent or if there's something else influencing their behavior. Either way, it's becoming a whole new kind of nightmare. And then there's the West Coast, California, Arizona, Nevada. The infection has spread like wildfire. The government has tried to enforce strict curfews, quarantines, and roadblocks, but it's too late. I've received disturbing reports from survivors trying to head north, away from California. It's as though the infected are anticipating the movements of survivors, and they're closing in. Multiple survivors have said they've seen entire groups of infected waiting at certain intersections, as if they're expecting someone. This isn't just random chance anymore. It's like they're playing chess with us and we're losing. In San Francisco, there are reports of military convoys being ambushed by the infected. I don't mean ambushed in the usual sense. This wasn't a mindless rush of zombies. No, it was an attack. A calculated assault on military trucks trying to transport supplies, and it's happening all over. Just last night, I got word that the Bay Area was overrun. The military tried to pull out survivors, but they were stopped dead in their tracks. I'm afraid to say this, but it looks like the infection is only the beginning of our troubles. Whatever is causing this is still out there spreading, changing, evolving. We've got a ticking clock, and we're running out of time. Meanwhile, there's a frightening development in Chicago. The infection is spreading rapidly along the Mississippi River, and the major cities surrounding it are being completely cut off. From reports, the infected are rising out of the river. We've always known that water could be a vector for disease, but no one expected this. Survivors trapped in the city are witnessing bodies floating in from the riverside, but these aren't normal infected. They're more aggressive, more resilient. Some have described the infected moving in coordinated groups, like a tactical force being unleashed. The possibility that there's an underground network or even something bigger at play is becoming more plausible every day. The situation isn't just a local disaster anymore. This is a global epidemic, a true pandemic. And as much as we've tried to prepare for something like this, we are still scrambling to understand the full scale of what's happening. The question isn't just about survival anymore. It's about trying to make sense of a world that's fundamentally shifting in real time. Now, as for the government, I'm hearing more and more that they're failing us. They're throwing everything they can at the situation, but it's not enough. Yesterday, I told you about their failed quarantine attempts in the north. Today, I can confirm that it's no better. They tried setting up a new military barricade at the Utah border, hoping to keep the infection from crossing into the rural areas. But it didn't last more than a few hours. The infected broke through in a matter of hours. No surprise there, honestly. The infected have become relentless. In fact, there are reports from survivors in southern Colorado that the government has been pulling out of areas where the infection is too heavy. The National Guard, the military, they're retreating. They're leaving people behind. They're pulling their troops from areas they can no longer control. And they've started enforcing even stricter curfews in major cities. But it's not stopping anything. I don't know if the government even knows what they're doing anymore. I'm getting reports that certain military groups are ignoring orders, fighting over what little resources they can get their hands on. There's no leadership. And I fear that if this keeps up, the collapse will be complete. I'm hearing that some emergency response teams have even turned on each other. There have been incidents of soldiers refusing orders to enter high-risk zones. People are losing faith in the military, and they're starting to question everything they've been told. There's no consistency, no clarity, and at this point, the government isn't just failing to stop the spread. They're actively making things worse. And that's not all. Rumor has it, the government is starting to use desperate measures. Word on the street is that they've begun deploying chemical weapons in certain infected zones. Bioweapons meant to wipe out the infected. But I'm hearing from survivors that it's doing the opposite. It's spreading the infection faster. People trapped inside quarantine zones say the air is thick with a new kind of contamination, something that's only making them worse. Some of the survivors who've managed to escape these zones say they feel different, like something inside them is changing. These aren't just reports from one person or a few scattered survivors. This is happening on a larger scale. Even more troubling, I'm hearing that 20 different countries I never thought would even communicate at a time like this, are now holding emergency meetings. Nations around the world are trying to come together to figure out what's happening and what they can do to contain it. These meetings are happening at the highest levels. But the question on everyone's lips seems to be the same. What do we do when the infection starts showing signs of intelligence? In places like Tokyo, survivors are reporting that the infected have become more strategic. They're breaking into fortified locations. They're working together to find survivors. And the government's response, Well, they're scrambling to put together an international response. But if you ask me, it's already too late. These emergency meetings are nothing more than a formality. They're desperate measures. But desperation can't stop this. I've been receiving a lot of communications from various governments about plans to close borders, to start reevaluating their military options, and to consider nuclear solutions. The idea that this could escalate to something on a nuclear scale is horrifying to even think about, but it's being seriously discussed behind closed doors. The idea of total devastation is becoming less of a what-if scenario and more of a when. I wish I could tell you that things are getting better, that there's some plan, some way out of this, but I can't. The truth is, the government has no idea what they're up against. They're throwing darts at a moving target, hoping something will stick. They don't know what caused the infection. They don't know how it spreads. They don't know how to stop it. And I don't think they're going to figure it out in time. So here we are, day 3. The infection is no longer just an outbreak. It's a war and we're losing. The infected aren't just mindless zombies anymore. They're learning, adapting, evolving. And the government, they're scrambling to keep things under control, but it's failing. The military is being overrun. Emergency meetings are happening, but it's all too little, too late. And here I am, talking into this mic, hoping that someone is still out there listening. I don't know how much longer I can keep going, but as long as I am, I'll keep telling you what I hear, what I know, and what I can share. This world is falling apart, and if we're going to survive it, we need to understand what's happening before it's too late. If you're still out there, stay alert, keep moving, and keep listening. I'll be back with more soon. Don't let the silence swallow you. It's day 3, and I can barely keep up with the chaos around us. The infection continues to spread like wildfire, and it feels like every day we hear from more survivors. Some holding on, some slipping away. The world outside is so different now, but there are still, say, people out there, still fighting to survive, and they keep reaching out to us, hoping to be heard, hoping to make it one more day. I'll keep sharing their stories. This broadcast is the last thread some of us have left. So here's where we stand today. Sarah, the one heading north from New York, is still hanging on. She managed to stay out of sight from military convoys for the past few days, but things are getting worse. She's in hiding, close to Albany, but her situation is getting dire. Sarah mentioned that the military has started a full-scale search operation in that region. The air is thick with tension. Every day feels like it could be her last. Sarah's been trying to keep her head down, but it's not easy. She told me that she's been forced to hide in trees for hours at a time, even in the rain, just to avoid the patrols that sweep the roads. She mentioned she hasn't seen another survivor in days, just soldiers and infected. That isolation is starting to wear on her. She's running low on food and her supplies are nearly gone. She also told me something disturbing. She's heard reports from other survivors who've witnessed the military using chemical weapons in nearby towns, especially in the areas just west of her. That's the kind of thing you don't expect to hear about from survivors. They're burning everything to the ground, trying to stop the spread. But if these reports are true, it's only making the situation worse. The infection is spreading quicker than they can burn it down, and it's becoming more resistant to the chemicals. Sarah hasn't lost hope yet. She's still pushing north, but I fear that time is running out for her. If you're listening, Sarah, stay safe. You're not alone. Unfortunately, I've heard the worst about James's group. Yesterday I held on to hope, hoping to hear back from him or one of his people. But now I know the truth. The barricades his group set up were breached during the night by a massive wave of infected. He and his crew fought back as best they could, but they were simply overrun. The group was in Washington, D.C. when everything went to hell. The barricades they had built were good, but not good enough. James mentioned they'd fortified themselves in an old building, something sturdy. But it wasn't the infected they had to fear most. It was the people. The military presence in the area, combined with desperate survivors trying to get away, created a perfect storm of chaos. James reported that when the infected broke through, they managed to drag a few of the survivors back into the shadows, and that's where the trail went cold. By the time the barricades fell, the rest of his group had scattered. No one knows where they are now. There's no word from them. The infected were quick to move in, and by the time the rest of the survivors could regroup, they had already moved deeper into the city. I wish I had better news for you, but I don't. James's story is a hard reminder. No matter how prepared you think you are, sometimes survival is more about luck than anything else. And in this world, luck doesn't come easy. On a more positive note, I've heard from Emily and Diego again. I'm glad to report that they made it out of Chicago, but it's been far from easy. They've been moving west toward Kansas, staying off the beaten path as much as they can. Emily and Diego were last holed up in a small farmhouse just outside of St. Louis. They're lucky. They've been able to avoid the military convoys and any major infected zones so far. But they're running low on supplies. Emily's message was surprisingly calm given everything they've been through. She said they'd been moving in a small convoy with a few other survivors, and although they're trying to keep a low profile, the infected are becoming more aggressive. She told me they're encountering more infected in groups. They're getting faster, more vicious, and as they move through the Midwest, Emily's noticing that the infections aren't just spreading, they're mutating. She believes the infection is adapting. It's changing its behavior in ways they hadn't anticipated. For instance, last night, when they were camped out by the side of the road, Emily reported that the infected seemed to be coordinating their attacks. It was almost like they were hunting, not just stumbling around. She's afraid that soon the infected will start to ambush survivors in packs, using traps or even luring people into compromised areas. Despite all that, Emily and Diego are still alive, still holding on. And that's a testament to their strength. Let's talk about Victor. He reached out earlier today. He's holed up in a school building just outside of Cleveland. Victor's story is different from what we've heard so far. He's seen something that should frighten us all. The infected are evolving in ways we couldn't have imagined. He's reporting that the infected are no longer the stumbling, mindless creatures we're used to. They're starting to learn, adapt, and use tools. Victor said he and his group were inside the school when they noticed the infected weren't just outside. They were actively trying to breach the barricades. At first, they thought it was just the usual madness, but then they saw something chilling. Infected were picking up objects, rocks, planks of wood, and trying to break the windows to get inside. At one point, Victor reported seeing an infected using a rock to smash a window. Victor and his group managed to fight them off, but he's worried that the infected are learning to plan their attacks, using tools to increase their chances of breaking into safe zones. Victor's warning to anyone listening is clear. Do not trust your safe places. The infected are evolving, and they are smarter than you think. I also received a message from Claire, a survivor holed up in Paris. The infection has spread across Europe now, and it's just as bad there as it is here. Claire is a medical student who had been studying at a university near the center of the city when the infection first hit. She says that the French government, much like the others, failed to respond in time. By the time they started imposing curfews, the city was already in chaos. Claire's group tried to make it to a hospital on the outskirts of Paris, hoping to find supplies, but they were ambushed on the way there. She says they managed to escape, but many of her fellow survivors didn't make it. The ones that did make it are now stuck in a building that's quickly running out of supplies. She mentioned a disturbing fact. The infected in Paris seem to be getting more organized. Claire believes they might be operating in groups, coordinating their attacks with unnerving precision. She's seen groups of infected moving in tight formations, almost like they're following orders. Claire doesn't know how this is possible, but she's worried that there may be something more to the infection than we understand. Claire is holding on to hope, though. She's determined to find a way out. But her options are limited, and the city is increasingly overrun. Finally, we have Antonio, a survivor from Madrid, Spain. Antonio's story is particularly harrowing. He's been stuck in the city for the past 2 days, desperately trying to find a way out. Madrid, like many of the major cities in Europe, has been decimated by the infection. Antonio says the streets are filled with abandoned cars, overturned dumpsters, and bodies. The military has set up barricades in an attempt to contain the infection, but it's clearly not working. He managed to escape his apartment building, but since then, he's been on the run. Antonio's trying to head south, toward Valencia, in search of a safer area. But his journey has been perilous. He said he's seen groups of infected stalking the streets in broad daylight, and he believes they might be getting smarter. In fact, Antonio has noticed that some infected are showing signs of what he described as cognitive behavior. They're not just aimlessly wandering anymore. They're actually patrolling certain areas. Antonio's group has been forced to take extreme measures to survive. They've been holed up in an old hotel near the city center, but it's only a matter of time before the infected find them. Antonio's trying to leave the city, but with the military tightening their grip, it's becoming increasingly difficult. As we hear these stories of survivors from different corners of the world, fighting against increasingly intelligent infected, trying to hold on to some sliver of hope, it's hard to ignore the truth. The world we knew is gone. We don't just have to fight the infected anymore. We have to fight against everything. The environment, other survivors, and ourselves. The infection is changing. It's adapting, and we must do the same if we want to survive. Stay vigilant, stay smart, and never stop fighting. Together, we might make it out alive, but the road ahead is long, and we're just getting started. It's day 3, and the world outside has descended into chaos in ways we've never seen before. The infection has gone global, and the military, desperate to hold on to whatever semblance of control remains, is ratcheting up their measures. It's clear now that we're not just dealing with an infection anymore. We're dealing with a full-scale disaster, one that the governments of the world never expected, and one that they're struggling to contain. I've been getting reports all day long, disturbing ones, about new military operations being launched in the hopes of curbing the spread. But here's the thing, nothing is working. The measures, as extreme as they are only escalating the problem. And the more the military pushes, the more they seem to be driving us into a corner. Let me start with something that's been causing a stir in the last 24 hours. There's a military operation being dubbed Clean Slate. Some of you may have heard whispers of it. Well, I've heard directly from a few survivors who have managed to slip past military checkpoints that the operation has begun in full force. The premise is simple, if you can call it that. The military is trying to eradicate the infection by any means necessary. That means using biological weapons, yes, biological weapons, to burn the infection out. I'm hearing reports that they've been releasing some kind of aerosolized chemical into heavily infected zones. They're calling it Project Cleansing, and it's meant to destroy the infected and sterilize the environment. But here's the kicker. It's not working. It's been less than a day since the chemical release in major cities, including New York and Chicago, and survivors are already reporting worse outcomes. Many have said that the infected seem to be getting more aggressive. Worse yet, there are some reports suggesting the infection is actually spreading faster after these chemical attacks. It's almost like the infected are becoming resistant to the chemicals. Some survivors I've heard from claim that the infected have started to show signs of increased coordination. They're not just aimlessly wandering or attacking in mobs anymore. They're working together, planning and executing coordinated strikes. I don't know if it's the chemicals mutating them or if this was inevitable, but I can tell you one thing. It's terrifying. and it seems to be making things much, much worse. Then there's the growing network of military checkpoints that have begun to appear across the country. The military has been scrambling to set up these barricades and safe zones to keep survivors from fleeing infected areas. But here's the reality. These checkpoints have become hotbeds of conflict and violence. I heard from a survivor in California yesterday. She said that she tried to cross into a supposedly safe zone, only to be stopped at one of these checkpoints. She described how the soldiers manning these checkpoints have become increasingly hostile, not only toward the infected, but toward civilians too. Many survivors are being turned away, shot on sight if they're seen as a threat, or even just for trying to escape. A report from Boston describes the same thing. Civilians who were once considered safe were being forcibly evacuated to military-run shelters. The shelters, by the way, are hardly safe. I've heard stories of overcrowding, food shortages, and in some cases, infected getting inside these so-called sanctuaries. It seems the military's attempts to impose order are failing everywhere. People are desperate. Those who can are fleeing to the wilderness, hoping the military will lose track of them. But it's not just the government they're running from anymore. It's the infected, too. Survivors are trapped in a kind of hellish limbo between the military, the infected, and the growing desperation of humanity. And let's talk about the firebombing efforts. It's clear that the military has decided to use any available tactic to purge the infected zones, but once again, their desperation is only making things worse. I've heard reports that entire cities are being firebombed, not just the outskirts or specific zones, but entire neighborhoods, with no regard for the civilians still inside. In some places, like Atlanta and Houston, the military has implemented these total quarantine zones where they have isolated the population, survivors and infected alike. They've walled off parts of cities and then sent in airstrikes to wipe out the infected in one fell swoop. The idea, I guess, is to burn everything down and start fresh. But that strategy has only left survivors with nowhere to go. People trapped in the quarantine zones report massive fires, smoke clouds, and the smell of burning bodies, infected and otherwise. It's a nightmare scenario. The military seems to think this will contain the problem, but they're just playing catch-up at this point. There are too many infected, and firebombing entire areas only spreads the infection further. One survivor I spoke to, Michael from Texas, described a scenario in which a whole suburb was bombed. He said it looked like the ground itself was still on fire, and it was nearly impossible to even breathe through the smoke. And then there were the screams. He couldn't even get close to his family, who were trapped in their own home by the flames. Now, let's talk about something else I've been hearing. A lot of complaints about evacuations that went horribly wrong. From what I've gathered, military convoys have been transporting survivors to safe zones, but these efforts haven't gone as planned. For one, the convoys are frequently ambushed. Survivors are reporting that military trucks carrying civilians are getting caught in traffic jams, or worse, falling victim to attacks by the infected or rogue groups of survivors. It's a mob mentality. People pushing and shoving to get on the military trucks, not caring about who gets left behind. And then there's the breakdown in communication. Survivors have reported that there's no reliable information coming from the military. Evacuations are haphazard. People are being relocated to supposed safe zones, only to find them overcrowded, undersupplied, and eventually overrun. The problem isn't just the infected, it's the collapse of infrastructure. The military's resources are running thin. The survivors, especially those in larger cities, are being shuffled around with nowhere to go and no way to survive. In some cases, people are just being dumped in these overcrowded camps, only to find themselves fighting for their lives in conditions that are no better than the streets they came from. And it's not just here in the U.S. Every country is struggling to contain this. In Europe, France, Germany, and Spain have all reported similar tactics. Some governments have begun imposing martial law, curfews, and forced relocations. But there's one thing every nation seems to be missing: communication. The United Nations called for an emergency meeting last night, but no clear action plan has been set. I've been getting reports from survivors in the UK who've been telling me that their own military has begun forcibly relocating people into holding camps. The camps are poorly managed, overcrowded, and full of infected. People who were once deemed safe are now getting sick. In South America, Brazil and Argentina are starting to see the same thing. Soldiers are taking extreme measures, firebombing urban areas, burning entire shanty towns to the ground, hoping it will stop the spread. But all it's doing is displacing survivors, pushing them further into the wilds, where they have no resources and no way to survive. It's clear now, the government is in over its head. The infection is spreading faster than they can respond, and the measures they've taken, military checkpoints, firebombing, and quarantine zones, are only making things worse. It's a desperate, failed effort to regain control. The real problem? They're treating the symptoms, not the cause. The infection is mutating, and the measures being taken are only exacerbating the situation. It's a cycle of escalation, and we're stuck in the middle of it. The survivors are caught between the infected and the military, both of whom are desperate and dangerous. The world outside is crumbling, and I'm afraid it's only going to get worse before it gets better. Stay safe and keep your head down. The world outside is not what it used to be. This government failures and military updates outline dives deep into the escalating military and government actions, the unintended consequences of those actions, and how things are deteriorating despite these desperate measures. It provides a mix of military overreach, failed evacuation efforts, firebombing, and the global response, painting a bleak picture of the authorities' inability to stop the infection. This is Station 72, and I'm still here, still breathing, somehow. I wish I could say the same about the world outside. The infection has swept through cities, towns, and countries, leaving only devastation in its wake. The air feels different now. It's thick with smoke, ash, and the lingering stench of death. I've spoken to more survivors in the past 24 hours than I care to remember, and none of them seem to hold on to the same optimism they did even just a few days ago. You hear that sound in their voices when they talk, the weariness, the resignation. They've seen too much. It feels like the world is falling apart faster than I can keep up. Every day the cities burn. Every day more people die. And the worst part? It seems like there's no way to stop it. This was supposed to be temporary, right? It was supposed to be a crisis, maybe. But nothing like this. And yet here we are, on day 3, fighting for survival like it's our first day on Earth. I've been behind this microphone for what feels like forever, and each time I think things can't get worse, they do. But still, I hold on. I don't know why. Sometimes. Maybe it's because I know you're still out there, listening. Maybe it's because I've heard that faint glimmer of hope in a few voices. The kind that says we're still here and we're not giving up. And if you're still out there, if you're still hanging on, then maybe, just maybe, there's a reason to keep going. But I'll tell you this, it's getting harder. And every day, I wonder how much longer we can keep this up. When I signed on to these broadcasts, I thought I was going to be reporting on a distant crisis. But now I realize we're all in the crisis. We're living it. We're surviving it. And I know, I've changed. I don't know if I'm stronger for it, but I'm certainly not the same person I was before this started. And I don't think anyone is, but if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that we can't afford to give in to despair. Not yet. If you're hearing my voice right now, then you're still connected to this world in some way. And as long as we're still connected, there's hope. It might be the smallest sliver, barely there, but it's enough. That is what keeps me talking, keeps me broadcasting. It's the thread of hope that ties us all together. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know if I'll still be here tomorrow. But for now, I've got this microphone, and as long as I do, I'm going to use it. For you. For us. Before I sign off, there's one thing I need to say. It's not something I've done much before, but these days nothing feels normal, and normal is long gone. If you're still out there, still listening, still holding on, if these broadcasts have kept you company, kept you grounded, then I need you to do something for me. I know. It sounds like a joke in the middle of all this chaos, but these broadcasts are the last lifeline we have left. We're all trying to survive, to get through each day. And if you're hearing this, it means you're still part of the fight, and that means something. It means you're still part of this network of survivors. So share this broadcast. Tell anyone who might need to hear it, we're in this together. If you're out there and you're listening, then we've still got a way to stay connected. You might be asking yourself why it matters now when the world's falling apart, but it matters because we are still connected. It's all we have left. It's the only thing that proves we're not alone. And we can't afford to let that go. Not now. Not when every day is more uncertain than the last. So share this with anyone who might need it. Let them know that they're not alone, that they still matter. Keep the information flowing. Keep the messages alive. Keep the hope alive. I was about to close up shop for today. Had almost shut off the transmitter, started thinking about tomorrow, when I got a message. It wasn't much. A garbled transmission, encrypted and broken up by static. But it wasn't like anything I've received before. It sounded like a warning. But the thing is, it was talking about a safe zone, or at least I think it said that. The message was so fragmented, and the quality so poor that it's hard to know for sure. But from what I could make out, there's some kind of location that's been designated as a safe zone, somewhere untouched by the infection, a place where people are supposed to go if they want to survive. It could be nothing. It could be a trap. Or it could be our last hope. But if this message is real, if there's a safe place out there, then we might have a chance to pull through. I don't know yet. I don't know if it's a trap or if it's the real deal. But I've already sent out a request for confirmation. I'll have more details in the next broadcast. But listen, if you hear anything, if you know something about this safe zone, please send a message back. Anything. We're all in this together. And whatever information you have might be the key to saving us all. If you've made it this far and listened to this radio broadcast, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We've discussed some deep topics, faced challenges together, and hopefully touched moments of hope along the way. If you liked the content, please subscribe to our channel so we can continue creating more broadcasts like this for you. And don't forget to like and share the video. Your support means the world to us. Without it, we wouldn't have the motivation to keep creating the kind of content that you enjoy. Every like, share, and comment gives us the strength to keep pushing forward and improve our broadcasts. I'll be back soon with more, but until then, keep your head down. Trust no one, stay vigilant, and above all, keep fighting. This is Alex Gray, signing off from Station 72. Stay safe, keep surviving.